Hey, I'm Julie, and here's the thing that doesn't make sense. You've got more experience than you've ever had. You're doing more runs on the board. You've got more evidence that you know what you're doing. And somehow, walking into a meeting at this level feels harder than it did 3 years ago when you had half the responsibility. The gap between where you are now and how you feel in that role is so different. It's not a confidence problem, it's something entirely different. And by the end of this, you're going to know exactly what's happening, why the advice you've been given makes it worse, and what actually closes that gap. So first of all, let's start with what this actually looks like day to day. So we're talking imposter syndrome. So let's start with seeing how that actually looks like. Now, because I'm willing to bet, you're going to recognize at least one of these things. You pause before going into a meeting, editing yourself in real time, wondering if what you're about to say sounds like someone at your level. You deflect credit, over-explain your decisions, as if you need to justify why you're the one making them. You prepare more than anyone else in the room because you're not sure you can trust yourself to know enough without the prep. And it's not just what you do, it's what's happening underneath. That moment where you're about to speak and your chest tightens, that split second where you think, what if this sounds stupid? What if I make a fool of myself? Or that feeling when someone praises you. Instead of it landing, it almost makes you feel uncomfortable because you're not used to receiving it. Like you've been in the spotlight and you're not quite sure you belong there. And if you're honest, there's part of you that's just waiting. You're waiting for someone to notice, to question, to find you out. Everything that I'm talking about now really comes from my heart because I've been in most of these positions, and I'm going to share my story in a moment. But imposter syndrome doesn't feel right to say this, but I feel like it is close to my heart, but only because I've felt like this most of my life. And I'm sure most of you do, but maybe you haven't recognized it yet, or maybe you are confusing this with confidence or lack of confidence. So let's see if we can just frame what imposter syndrome is, right? Because everyone calls it this kind of behavior when we feel like an imposter, that we're not the version that we should be, or we're in a role or something that we just feel like we're going to get found out all the time, right? That we use that word imposter, or those words, imposter syndrome. If you're speaking to someone, they'll probably advise you that what you need to do is fake it till you make it. Talk yourself confident, act like you belong and you believe it. Well, here's the part that no one tells you. That advice actually can make things worse. I know, right? Because imposter syndrome isn't a confidence problem. It's not that you don't believe in yourself enough. It's that your external reality has updated. It's updated your title, your authority, your decisions, but internally, it hasn't caught up yet. Now, I call this the identity lag. And once you see it that way, the solution changes completely. So let me show you what's actually happening. I want to unpack this a little bit for you and try and give you some examples as well. For a moment, I want you just to think about a time when perhaps you got your last promotion. Maybe you got a new job. Maybe you even qualified for something. Maybe, you've been studying for something for ages and you've just got your certificate. Or you want to go for that bigger role and you took that role, but something just doesn't feel quite right. Or maybe you were given authority that you hadn't had before. So all these things would be what we would be calling outside your comfort zone, right? But these are things that you've always wanted and you're actually good at and you actually deserve, but something's not quite right. So externally, everything has shifted. So if it's that new job, right, you've got that new title, there's a new expectation and people are now coming to you for answers and you can do it. But internally, you're still not measuring yourself against the version that felt legitimate, the one that was executing and not leading, the one who was proving themselves but not being trusted. So your body registers this mismatch as danger and you're operating outside the bounds of who you know yourself to be, right? And that's why you get that tightening in your chest before you speak. That might be why you over prepare, because that way you hold back your opinion and then you kick yourself afterwards. Now, every time you level up externally without updating internally, that gap widens. And you're not becoming a fraud, it's just that lag is getting bigger. Now, if we go back to that fake it till you make it, that's asking you to perform as a person you don't yet feel, which means you're constantly aware of that gap, constantly bracing for someone to notice, someone to find you out. And this is a bit that really throws people, because the more successful you become, the worse this can feel. And that's not because you're getting it wrong, but because that gap is still widening and you're not able to think and be that person that fits that place and position that you're in right now. And then what happens? That gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then your everyday life becomes harder because you feel like you're feeling worse. You feel like you're getting more of that feeling in your chest, or that uncomfortable feeling every time you're in that board meeting, or every time you're performing in that new role. Or like I said, if you've just qualified in something and now you're in that role, that imposter syndrome is really, really strong. Now, I've experienced this in my corporate career, but also as a business owner in my career that I'm doing now. I want you just to remember that this fix isn't trying to act more confident. It's about closing this gap and updating the internal reference point so that it matches the role that you're actually in. Right? Can you see the lag in your own week? What things are happening in your life that you're feeling that imposter? You're feeling that you don't feel good enough, or you're going to get found out. So I always want this show to feel real, because I'm real, and the situations that I help my clients with are very real. And a lot of them I've been through myself. And that's why my audience is yourselves, because I spent 35 years in the corporate and now I'm in a business owner. So I've felt what it feels like to be in both those roles. But actually, it's not the role that's the common denominator here. It's about your own identity. And this can impact your work, private life, every aspect of your life. So don't be under any illusions that this is just your work life that this is impacting. It can impact all aspects of your life. So I just wanted to just give a little bit about me and how I've lived with imposter syndrome. Because like I said to you, it is real, and it was certainly real for me. And to a point it still is, but the difference is now I'm aware of what's going on and I can work on myself and I can, understand what's going on. So that's the biggest difference. But I spent 35 years in the corporate. And if I'm really honest, most of that time I felt like an imposter. But don't forget, I wouldn't have really acknowledged that or known that at the time. And when I reflect back now, even when I was at school, I didn't really put myself forward for things. I was average. I was all right in some sets. I was rubbish at some other things. But if you stayed in the middle, then you wouldn't really get noticed. So you didn't have to push yourself forward, because why would I do that? Because someone would find me out, right? And then knock me off my pedestal. That was the thing that I said. And it breaks my heart when I say that now, because I just think, oh my God, that's so sad for me, because it's what things has it stopped me from doing? So, even back then at school, in my subconscious programming, I didn't feel good enough and I didn't feel worthy, but I didn't know that then. I hung out with my friends who I still see many of them now, but I always felt that they were smarter than me. They was in better sets than me. So even with them, I still felt a little bit of an imposter maybe hanging out with them. And that kind of followed me in my career, which was pretty successful, but it could have been way more successful. Now, I naturally grew into my senior roles. I was in companies for quite a long time, and it's like you just start doing new things and they go, hey, Judy, can you run this project for me? I'm like, God, no, I'm not a project manager, am I supposed? But you've just been doing it. Okay, because you kind of just do things, and that's what happened to me. I just kind of went into positions and I did really well, got recommended for new role, and that's how it went. But I didn't see it like that. I was kind of a hybrid person. I did project management, I did business analysis, but that's just what I did. I didn't understand the difference of it really. And then many years ago, I took voluntary redundancy, and then suddenly I had to decide who I was, because I couldn't just put on my CV, a mishmash of this stuff, because I didn't know what to apply for. I had to either apply for project management roles or business analyst roles. So then I had to put a label on it, which I didn't really want to. So I chose project management route. And then I had to sort of sell myself as a project manager, but I never really had a title as a project manager before. I was doing it, but I didn't have the title, and it really didn't make me feel comfortable at all. So eventually I kept looking for roles. It wasn't a great time in the world of the climate for jobs at the time, but then I'd gone for these interviews and they were, really challenging, and I didn't get them. And then this job interview came up for a contract role. And when I got to the interview, it was like, oh my God, it was someone I used to work with. And I'll always be eternally grateful. He gave me an opportunity that I took, not believing that I could do it. and it was a 6-month contract role. And then I was working with the elite people that I'd sat and worked with before, who I always saw as the contractors, right? But when it came to my renewal in 6 months' time, it was like, oh, they're going to find me out. They're going to find me out. And then I got a renewal, and it was like, geez, well, they obviously haven't noticed yet. They'll catch up with me in the end, right? This went on for 18 months, 2 years. Then I got another job on the back of referrals from other people. Then the next one, and I've done contracting for over 10 years. And every role I got was based on people recommending me and my experience and what I was able to do. Now, you would have thought that would have been enough for me to go, well, surely I'm good at my job. But no, I still felt the imposter the whole way through. And this just went on and on and on until I understood all this stuff, until I started to do that work on myself and really uncovering what I believed about myself. And that's when things started to shift. And here's the truth. I've had to do it all again as a business owner, speaking on stages, doing sales calls, working with clients, trying to sell my stuff to people, winning awards, writing books, doing this show. Everything is about just pushing yourself to that next level. And even with the show, it was like, oh yeah, sure, you've done things before, you've done live stuff, but this is something that is a little bit different, and I've got to show up for you every week. And it's like, trying to come up with what all the excuses under the sun of why I shouldn't start it. But you just have to understand what's going on, and then you work through it, and then you push through. But now, obviously, my identity has changed. My lag isn't anywhere near as it was. So if you imagine that this is me now, if I hadn't done the identity work, my lag would have been right back here, whereas my lag is probably here. But there is always still a lag, and there's always something that I need to work on. But I love that. I love the fact that I know this, and I stop and think, well, why do I feel uncomfortable about this? Why have I got that horrible feeling in my stomach? Why do I feel a bit sick about this? But then it's, okay, let's go and do some work on myself. Let me go, and I call it go and have a word with myself, and I go and spend some time processing and tapping into my intuition and tapping into me, because I know I've got the answers inside. But, if you don't know, how can you do that? So this impacts so many of us, right? And I'm going to start talking about the step that I'm going to give you today, which I'm going to call it the identity lag, right? So it's really simple, and it's a way to start closing your gap, all right? Now, there's 3 steps to it, and you can do it in 5 minutes. It's very, very straightforward. But remember, everything we're doing, everything you're starting to do from the moment you watch one of these shows, then it's about having that awareness. And that's always the first point of call, really. So step 1, identify the role you're operating in now. So not the role that you feel like you're in, the actual one, your title, your authority, the decisions you're expected to make. So if you have just got that promotion, that's your identifying that role, right? The new role. Then step number 2, identify the internal reference point you're still measuring yourself against. So that's the version of you that last felt legitimate. So ask yourself, when did I last feel I fully belonged in my role? That's your reference point. And then step 3 is name the specific gap. So what does your current role require that your old identity doesn't believe it can do, right? So that's the 3 steps. So the gap is the identity update that you need. It's not about you needing more confidence. It's not about you need to perform better. It's a specific belief about yourself that hasn't caught up to the role that you're already in. So you can use this before you go into a high-stake meeting, for an interview, to start a show, whatever it is. It's about really running through that process. So the gap you name is the thing to work on. So whatever comes up in that gap, that's where you are. So let me show you how to use this in practice. Let's have a few examples here. So maybe you're in a leadership meeting, okay? And someone asks your opinion on a strategic decision. Now, you know the answer, but for some reason you just hesitate and you soften your language and maybe defer to someone else's framing first. And in that moment, it's not that you don't know the answer, it's that part of you still doesn't believe you're the person who gets to say it. So you're in that role, you've got the promotion, you've got it all, but your identity lag is going, oh no, but we're still in this role over here. We don't do these types of meetings, right? Does that make sense? So in this instance, after the meeting, you're going to run the audit. So remember, step number 1, you're going to identify your current role. So what are you expected to do? So what perspective are you supposed to share and state if you're asked directly? Number 2, identify the internal reference. So the version of you that was brought in to execute, not to shape direction. So the version over here, not the version here. And then step 3, name that specific gap. Now that gap might be you don't yet believe your strategic opinions carry weight. It might be that you're quite young, for example, and you're in, quite a high position, and you're in a room with really, older people with lots of experience, and you're like, oh, I bet they think that I'm too young to be here. But you've done the work, you deserve to be there. But that version of you sitting in that room might still believe that you're not ready, even though you've proved yourself so many times. So just remember, the gap is the identity update you need. So where is in your gap, that's the bit you need to update. So here's another scenario, and I'll definitely resonate with this one, right? This is about when you receive recognition, right? Now that might be an award, it might be a public acknowledgement, it could be a promotion announcement, right? It could be anything. Now, instead of feeling proud, you feel exposed, right? You immediately think about what people don't know about you. What are they going to think of you? What you haven't done yet. And that feeling of exposure, that's not proof that you don't belong. It's the identity lag being activated. And I can remember just as in 2020, when I got made redundant and I started on this journey of retraining, I went back to work for 2 years. And then when the 2 years was up, I was like, no, I'm ready now to cut my ties, cut off my security blanket and go all in. And that happened in December. And about 2 days before, I can't remember if it's 2 days before or 2 days after, I was at an event, a Queens in Business event. And I was speaking on the stage in like a group and it was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. And then that evening I won my first award. And it was like, yesterday I was still logging on. I say logging on because it was like COVID time, in the corporate world. And now I'm like, out here doing something completely different, speaking I've got a microphone on a stage, and and I've won my first award. And it's like, who the hell do I think I am? I've only just qualified. I've got, and this is where you can sometimes become that learner who doesn't stop getting new qualifications because you don't feel good enough. Well, before I go and put myself out there, I just need to get this qualification, and you get that qualification, and then you're like, yeah, but what I probably need now is this. And a lot of that is other issues that are in your identity, but that is also you being an imposter, right? Because you don't feel that you're an authority to actually speak about that subject. Does that make sense? And that's when we've got that gap. So you stop bracing yourself for exposure because you think something's going to happen. You start recognizing that discomfort is a bad thing, but it isn't, right? When we get that discomfort, you don't want it all the time, but it's good to have it sometimes because you're moving forward. When you get up every day and you don't feel anything, then that means you're probably in humdrum life and you're not pushing yourself and you're not becoming that version of you and doing the things that you can do and, being that version that you deserve to be. So here's the truth behind it. When you acknowledge your achievements, your brain releases dopamine, which is linked to a reward, motivation, and reinforcing behavior. And you can also get a really good boost to serotonin, which is more about status, confidence, and feeling good about yourself. And over time, this helps your brain start to register evidence that you are capable, which is exactly what your identity lag work is about, right? And that's interesting, isn't it? That I used to think that people who told everybody how amazing they were and celebrated what they did, I thought that was a show off. And I would steer it off, think, oh no, it really made me feel uncomfortable. Didn't make them feel uncomfortable. But now I understand differently. I'm like, do you know what? Fair play. If you've got the confidence and your identity lag is there and you believe who you are and you celebrate what you do, then good on you. And that's what we should all do. That's a good point. If you, from now on, after watching this, if you see someone celebrating themselves, go and congratulate them, pat them on the back, give them, the appreciation they deserve. Because if you feel uncomfortable about it, that's because something's going on inside for you and it's your issue, not theirs. And to know that when you do praise yourself, and that's why gratitude every morning and saying lovely things every morning, it gives you that dopamine hit, that serotonin hit. And rather than get your dopamine hit from being on the phone, on social media, get it from just being kind to yourself and gratitude for yourself and things that you're grateful for. Because that's what it's doing. It's sending that really lovely energy through your body. It is about acknowledging your wins, right? Your brain doesn't register them if you don't. And this is, again, this is so me or was me, I can remember, qualifying for things, doing week training programs. I always remember, even when I spent 4 years training to be a counsellor back in the day, and I got my certificate and I was just, oh, that's great. Put it in the folder. I don't think I even really told anyone because I felt embarrassed. Well, I don't know if embarrassed, but I don't know. It's just like, I never really rewarded myself. I never really celebrated my achievements. But if I had have done, my brain would have registered it even more. And then that's more reinforcement, right? That's more evidence that's being stored. And that helps to bring your lag in a little bit closer, because then you can actually feel that you're capable at that level. Whereas when you do acknowledge them, even just to yourself, you get that little dopamine hit and that sense of, I did that. And that's not ego. That's actually how you start updating your identity. So instead of it being bragging, it's actually part of the work. So what changes when you actually start closing that gap? Well, when you close that identity lag deliberately, you stop performing your way through roles that you've already earned. You operate from who you actually are now, not who you were when you last felt legitimate. And that's the constant background noise of, what if I'm not enough? What if I let myself down? What if I let my bosses down? Whoever it is that you're presenting in this meeting, maybe your boss is sitting there and he's thinking, oh no, she's done it again. She's mucked up. Well, that's what you're thinking, right? They're not. They're thinking, God, she's amazing. So glad I brought her into this meeting. So you speak up without editing yourself mid-sentence. You receive recognition without bracing for someone to take it back. You trust your own judgment because your internal sense of yourself finally matches the seat you're sitting in. Just let that hit for a moment. So here's what I want you to do this week. First of all, I want you to remember that imposter syndrome isn't a confidence deficit. It's the identity lag, the gap between your external reality and your internal reference point. The identity audit makes that gap visible so that you can start looking to close it. So the next time this happens, and I promise you it will, maybe today, tomorrow, maybe in the next week, but instead of over preparing or holding back, just pause and run the audit. So for your action this week, the next time you feel like a fraud in a room that you've earned the right to be in, a meeting, a presentation, even a conversation where you catch yourself over preparing or holding back, I want you to run that audit within 24 hours. Write down the role that you're operating in, the internal reference point that you're still measuring yourself against, and look at that specific gap. Name the outdated belief out loud. And I really hope that makes sense. But one more thing before we go. That gap that you identified, the outdated belief about yourself that's creating this mismatch, the audit shows you what it is. But even if you've been operating from an outdated identity for years, there are layers underneath that one belief, patterns that reinstall that leg every time you level up. Now, the Upgrade Gameplan is a 45-minute working session where we map out what's really going on underneath this. We look at why the lag keeps showing up, what's driving it at a deeper level, and most importantly, what actually needs to shift for you to stop hitting that same pattern every time you try to grow. Now, for a lot of people, this is the moment things finally make sense. And from there, you can look at what the right next step is for you, depending on what comes up. So that's the deeper identity work I do with my clients through my Identity Box Rewire method. Now, the game plan is fully booked right now, and I reach out personally when capacity opens. So the next step is to join the waiting list. Now, you should see that there's a QR code popping up on the screen, but there'll also be a link in the comments for you to find it as well. So what I recommend you do, if you're feeling like this is something that resonates with you, and maybe the time is right now for you to start leveling up and breaking through your glass ceiling, then register on that link. And as soon as I've got any spaces available, I promise I'll reach out to you and then we can book in your 45-minute free call. All right. And I want you just to know this. If this is happening, it does not mean you're not good enough. It usually means you've outgrown the version of you that you're still holding on to. Let's just do a quick summary of today's show. Imposter syndrome equals identity lag, not a confidence deficit. The identity lag audit run 24 hours no later than 24 hours after something's happened for you. So the identity lag audit, number 1, what's the current role? Number 2, what's the internal reference point? And number 3, what's that specific gap? and it's the gap that you need to focus on. Fake it till you make it widens that gap. Identity updates close that gap. So thank you for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.